Well, I can remember Francis Sears telling me that he was very impressed with the artwork in the book, and Gerald Zacharias saying to me, "You've ruined everything, Resnick. You've done physics in the classical way so well that it can't do it in a revolutionary way in which we should do it." Some of you may remember Gerald Zacharias, who headed the PSSE program. In any case, the book was ready for production, and the first crisis came. Now I'm going to stop being that serious, okay? Our first crisis came when the book was in production. We had a problem in the momentum chapter about an opossum on a flatboat walking toward shore. And I had in mind Pogo, comic strip character, the opossum. And we had an artist in our group who made a drawing, perfect drawing. And you know, Kelly and all those people who write these cartoons have a battery of artists to do it for them. So I wrote to Walt Kelly if he'd let us use this picture we had, or if he'd make one for us. And his manager intercepted the mail all the time and said, "No, you can't use that drawing, and moreover, Kelly is not going to make one for you." Well, the book's getting into galleys, and we're getting ready for pages, and there's that blank spot there about an opossum in a flatboat, and there's nothing there. And finally, I called the manager and pleaded with him, and he said, "Well, look in the existing Pogo literature. If you can find anything in there that suits the problem, you can have it." So I went over to the bookstore and I bought all the Pogo books, and I came to my office, put my feet up on the table, and I'm reading through the Pogo books when the chairman of the department walks in, and Howard Carrigan, and he never said a word to me about it. He didn't know I was really doing physics at the time. But anyhow, I simply could not find anything that suited. So instead of, what could we do? We had to put something in there. So instead of an opossum in a flatboat, see figure so-and-so, we had to use the logo of Pogo, namely an opossum, see figure so-and-so. I'll show you that first thing on the first slide. Can you see it? Okay. So we had the logo of Pogo in the book. Well, when the second edition came around, I wasn't going to fool around with Walt Kelly. Peanuts was in. So I figured I'd write to Charles Schultz, not knowing how commercial he was at the time, telling him how the book was such a success. And this time, we had Snoopy walking towards the shore with Lucy there, and Peanuts holding his blanket and everything else. Sent that drawing and asked if he would let us use it, or if he'd give us one. And he said, "I'll send you one right away." By the way, his address, his home is 1 Snoopy Lane. So he sent us a picture, and that wouldn't do either. He had Snoopy on a boat, but he wasn't walking towards the shore at all. And I'm going to have to apologize to you, but the next slide shows Snoopy not even walking towards shore. So I had to rewrite the problem that the shoreline is also in this direction or something like that. I wasn't very successful with those artists. Many of you don't remember Pogo, but he's the guy who said, "We've met the enemy and they is us." Remember that? That's Pogo. Okay, well, about 2 years after publication, a professor of physics at a school that had been using our book writes to me as follows: "Dear Professor Resnick, recently I read a statement to the effect that teachers remember textbooks by the name of authors, whereas students remember the color of their covers. Determined to test this for myself, I asked our students in engineering physics to name the authors and color of their physics text on a recent examination. I thought you might be interested in some data on the transient nature of an author's fame." Only about 30% of the class knew the names of the authors, or any reasonable facsimile, but over 90% knew the color of the book. There's a possibility that the other 10% were confused by our using 2 editions at the same time. Whether it was because of the press of time during the exam or the typical engineer's disregard for linguistic precision, some renderings of the authors' names came through with an amusing variety of spellings. And now the third slide. Halloway and resnack. This student, I think, skipped lunch. Halliday and resnick, possibly related to arsenic. Holiday and resnick. This test was just after the Christmas vacation. Holiday and residay. My favorite. It has a certain swing to it. Holiday and rensick. How I felt after grading the tests. There were several last-ditch efforts by students who memorize only essentials, that is, H&R. The class politician, though, was taking no chances. His last name begins with R, and he's a very smart and intelligent man. Well, now consider this. 9 years after publication, actual sales of the book were about 900,000. Incredible. You should know that the physics market is the smallest of all the sciences. I'm sure you know it's smaller than mathematics, chemistry, or biology, but it's smaller than astronomy or geology also because they're typically chosen by non-science students as their science elective. So it was rather incredible to have those sales. In any case, all this was apart from the Formosan nationalist Chinese government that not only published a book in Chinese, they published it in English and competed with Wiley here in the States for the sale of the book. But most countries did not belong to the copyright agreement, you see, and I think the U.S. probably stole some Russian books too, or things of that sort. But I was really upset that the Russians hadn't seen fit to steal my book. What the hell was wrong with it? If everybody else is stealing it, why aren't they stealing it? So a visiting Soviet physicist was at our school. His colleague was Ed Brown at my school. And I got to like the guy. And so I figured I'd bring him copies of my book as a gift. So I walk in and I say, I'd like you to accept these textbooks. And he said, oh, we already have translated the best American physics textbooks. I said, is that so? He said, yes, we have a book by a student of Fermi's. And I thought for a while, and I said, oh, you must mean J. O'Rear, who took part in the Pugwash conferences and was probably known to Russian scientists. Jay is still at Cornell. And he didn't know O'Rear. All he knew was that it was a student of Fermi's. And they already had the best books, and he refused to take my book, so I left. You know, a little, what should I say, feebly, you know, I left. In any case, as fate would decree it, I received a letter from a West German dealer 1 week later, who kept up on Soviet publications. Dear Mr. Resnick, according to the Soviet weekly book catalog, Novy Knigi SSSR, number 12, a book which you wrote entitled Physics, 1966, has been translated into Russian and is scheduled to be published by the Prozvestia Publishing House in Moscow sometime in the third quarter of 1969. If you have any interest in obtaining a copy of the Russian version, perhaps we could be of service to you in procuring it. And enclosed in there was a catalog description of the book in Russian, of course. Well, I can't read Russian. So I took that description to my Russian visitor and asked him to translate it. And he starts translating, and it slows down, and finally he says, you? And I said, yes. And he continued to translate it, and I left. 1 week later, Ed Brown comes into me. He said, Bob, I need copies of your book. I need copies of your book. My Soviet visitor is leaving, and he's extremely anxious to take copies of your book back to the Soviet Union. And that's how that happened, and I don't care to analyze how come.